Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Waterloo in south central London to Woolwich in southeast London. This ride takes around an hour and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey takes around 40 minutes and requires a change of line, so going by bike is a little slower, although this video does start and end at two transport hubs, so if your final destination isn't the station itself, you might find that there's not so much difference. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to all of those of you who support the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute too, then you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting outside Waterloo Station on Waterloo Road and we're going to head right down Sandell Street. Sandell Street is actually one way, so if you're doing this journey in the opposite direction, you might want to use the adjacent Alaska Street, which is two-way and comes out in more or less the same place. That is the only one-way section of this video though, and the rest of it is entirely symmetrical. Our route today has three main sections. The first section, which we're on now, goes through traffic calm streets around the back of Waterloo Station through Lambeth and Southwark. These streets have had through traffic removed from them by filters like the one which we're going through now, which don't let motor vehicles through, either with signs that prevent them from going through or bollards to physically stop them from driving that way. Generally for the first section we'll be on the main carriageway of the road, but traffic levels will be very low thanks to these interventions. The second section of the video runs on the newly completed Cycleway 4. That's a cycleway that runs on the main road with a fully protected lane all the way from around London Bridge where we pick it up, past Greenwich and then on its way to Charlton, where we'll leave it. The third and final section of the video will take us on the Thames Path, right into Woolwich, with a fully protected path that's almost entirely separated from motor traffic. Although riverside paths can vary in quality, the one in the video today is really quite good, and I'll show it to you later when we get there. One really requested feature in the video that people have been asking me for is to show them how to get from Cycleway 4 around Greenwich to the Thames Path so you can continue journeys further east than Greenwich, where the main road cycleway stops. I'll be showing you how to do that in this video, so do stay tuned to find out. For now though, we're following a TfL signposted route called Cycleway 14. You can see that by the fact that C14 is written on the ground with bike symbols, and there's also little green and blue signs on the lampposts which say C14. This is mostly an on-carriageway backstreet route, although as you can see on the right there is a protected cycle lane running in the opposite direction. I love the little outdoor drinking thing that Newcomen Street has got going on with the King's Arms pub there, with seats on both sides of the road. It's a nice place to sit, especially if you like watching bicycles go past, which I think some people do find quite relaxing. One interesting fact about Newcomen Street, which I didn't know until I did some research, was that I'd assumed it was named after Thomas Newcomen, the inventor of the steam engine. In fact, it's actually named after a less famous Newcomen called Elizabeth Newcomen, who died in 1674, having lived nearby and left all her property in trust to feed and clothe poor boys and girls. The money was partly used to set up a girls' school, which existed on the site until 1970, when it was demolished and replaced in part by the newly constructed Guy's Hospital site, which is just around there. Now, if you look on the right at that red brick building, you'll see that above the door it says London Leather, Hide and Wool Exchange. That's because Leather Market Street, which is the street we're on now, was the centre of London's leather industry in the 19th century, which is probably no surprise given the name. Now, if you've ever been to a leather tannery, you'll know it smells terrible, And that's actually the reason why it's here, because it used to be done in the City of London, but the City of London really hated the smell, and it was becoming a respectable finance centre, so they didn't want that stench permeating the streets of the city. So the leather tanning industry and its associated trade was moved to Bermondsey, outside the bounds of the City of London, which is where we just passed through. Now today, as you go under this railway bridge in Bermondsey, you will smell something very different, and that is the smell of roasting coffee from the nearby Maltby Street Market, which is just on the right. If you do have time and you're just doing this as a leisure ride, I definitely recommend visiting that market. It is a nice place to stop and get something to eat. Now, just coming up is where we're joining Cycleway 4 on the main road. Wait for the cycle traffic light to go across, but do just be aware that cyclists travelling on Cycleway 4 don't have a red light when we have a green light. So you'll just need to make sure that there is a gap in the flow of cyclists when you join that lane. Be careful, because there will be people cycling quite fast from both your left and your right, and that isn't necessarily immediately obvious from the signage. Now that we're on C4, you'll see that it's a really high quality piece of infrastructure and really well used by loads of people on bikes, scooters and all sorts of other contraptions. This is a two-way protected cycle track, which means that in both directions we're on this side of the road. You just use the other side of the path, like the people who are coming the other way are doing, who you can see. I've talked about the advantages and disadvantages of two-way paths versus with-flow cycle lanes in other videos on this channel, so I won't go into them in too much detail. Generally, this is a really great piece of infrastructure, but there are a couple of things that you do need to be aware of when riding down here, particularly from a safety perspective. One is that on junctions which aren't signalised, so those that cross side roads like the one here without any traffic lights, just be extra careful of drivers turning into and out of the lane. That's because not all drivers are used to two-way cycle tracks, so they don't always look in both directions when you're cycling across them, and that can sometimes lead to them driving into you accidentally. So do just keep an eye out and be wary as you cross those non-signalised junctions, because not all motorists are really careful around them. Generally, two-way cycle tracks work best along roads which don't have too many side roads. Running alongside Southwark Park here, like we're doing now, is a great example of that, and there aren't really many side roads here. Another classic one is the one that's built along the embankment in central London, where obviously there are no side roads along the River Thames. But in other parts of C4, particularly as we get closer to Greenwich, there are more junctions. Some of them are like this one here, which, as you can see, has quite recently been painted blue. There's another one coming up just here, in case you missed it. People have asked me about this and what the reason for it is. It's actually a safety feature, and it's a visual cue so that drivers know that there are cyclists crossing that in both directions. That's also why it has all these arrows and cycle symbols, which is to try and give them a little extra hint to expect people coming both ways. Now, there were and still are a few cycle lanes in London that were painted entirely in blue. That was for a different reason. That was because the original Cycle Superhighways programme under Boris Johnson was actually sponsored by Barclays Bank, whose colour is blue, and it was chosen to paint the lanes, as well as the original hire bikes. Now, we're coming up to a slightly problematic junction here. This one outside Surrey Quay Station is problematic because it takes a really long time for the lights to change, and I hope that those will be tweaked to make them flow a bit better. This second set of lights here is also a bit of an issue. As you can see, motorists tend to squeeze through the red light and then onto the crossing when they don't have a green light to go, which is obviously really dangerous. I know that the local cycling campaign has called for TfL and Southwark Council to reintroduce a yellow box junction there, where there's that yellow grid, and if drivers drive on it when they're not supposed to, they get fined by camera. I really hope that does happen, because something needs to be done to deter people from driving down there, as it is pretty dangerous and really uncomfortable to have to squeeze through cars, especially when they've got a red light and you've got a green one. Now, you may notice that different parts of this lane have slightly different construction methods. The part that we just went through was largely separated from the road with plastic wands, whereas this bit has a much more high quality curb. That's because it was built and funded in sections. This section was built pre and during the pandemic, when there was still a bit of cash around for projects like this. Unfortunately, TfL's finances suffered significantly, and so a decision was taken to build the middle section, which we just went on, using what are called temporary materials, which are a bit cheaper and probably meant that the project could actually get done. It's not ideal, but I think they've made a reasonable compromise to actually get it built, so fair enough. Overall, C4 is a really fantastic route which has completely unlocked totally new areas for cycling and also just made it safe to cycle on the main road, which it wasn't before. One thing that I would change about it is it would be nice if London could start using a different coloured surface for its cycleways compared to the main road. That would probably obviate the need to have those blue sections outside the junctions. I think it was actually a good idea to paint the original cycle superhighways blue, as it did just mean that it looked different from the rest of the street and you could tell what was a cycle lane and what wasn't. Maybe blue wasn't the best choice of colour. I do like the red that they use in the Netherlands and also in some London boroughs like Waltham Forest and other parts of the country. I think Salford uses red as well. Some places in London have traditionally used green and maybe they could go back to that, but red does look pretty smart, so maybe they should do that. It's probably too late for this particular cycleway, and I'm not suggesting that it be resurfaced right now. It probably won't be resurfaced for quite a while now, I imagine, but maybe it's something that could be considered for future projects, because I think it would improve the look and feel and also just the visual language of the street and make it more intuitive for people to know what's a cycle lane, what isn't. Now, the eventual plan is for this on-road protected lane to stretch all the way to Woolwich and actually to Plumstead and Abbey Wood. There are actually plans out for consultation on the TfL website, which you can go and have a look at, and they do look really, really good. For now though, the lane kind of terminates around Greenwich, and then there's a further section past Greenwich which runs kind of to Charlton sort of area. It's not immediately obvious to everyone, I think, how those sections link up, as they're not actually obviously contiguous, but you can link between them, and I'm going to show you how to do it now. Once we cross over the Deptford Creek Bridge, we're going to turn left down Norway Street and head towards the riverside, which will take us around to Cutty Sark. In the future, you should just be able to head straight down that road, which is turned off to our right, but for now we have to do a bit of a detour. It's really not too much of a problem, but it will be much nicer when you can just continue straight on the main road, I think. That will require the London Borough of Greenwich to rebuild Greenwich Town Centre, and I think they have plans to remove the top arm of the gyrator in the town centre, which should also make it much nicer for pedestrians and just as a general place to hang out, less dominated by motor traffic. But it also have huge advantages for people cycling. One of those advantages will be to avoid Cutty Sark Gardens, which we're just coming up to now. If you look carefully at the small sign on the lamppost there on our left, it's quite easy to miss. It does actually say no cycling is allowed in this area, and I'm reliably informed that Greenwich Council do actually sometimes enforce that, or at least have in the past, with civil enforcement officers issuing fines. You've probably noticed that not everybody does spot that restriction, and quite a few people do still cycle through here, and that's not really a surprise, firstly because of how hard the sign is to see, but secondly because it's actually part of two National Cycle Network routes. National Cycle Network routes 1 and 4 actually meet in Cutty Sark Gardens, so it is a strange place to have a cycling restriction, which I suppose speaks to the quality of the National Cycle Network in general. In these videos though, we do our best to stick to the rules, so I've dismounted through Cutty Sark Gardens and taken the time to look at the view and the rather lovely sailing ship. For those unaware, that is the Cutty Sark, which was a T-clipper. Now I'm back on my bike now that we're through that area, and I'm going to go through the Royal Naval College. This is the easiest way to get through this part of Greenwich, as it's more or less traffic free and has a nice wide path/road. Unfortunately, it does close at night and in the very early mornings, so if you come here around that time, you'll want to use the riverfront, which is just to our left. You can access that from Cutty Sark Gardens as well, and then you can turn right and join us at the end of this gate where we're just approaching now. The riverfront during peak times is not a great place to cycle down as it's a bit narrow and can get busy, but given it'll be night time if you need to use that, it shouldn't be too much of a problem as it will of course be night and therefore not peak time. However you get through that section though, you'll want to turn into Old Woolwich Road, which we're on now. Old Woolwich Road is a really nice quiet street, and the reason for that is that it's actually had a modal filter applied to it. That means there's a bollard at one end of it which closes it to through traffic, meaning that all cars on here are just accessing homes and properties in the area. The bollards are just here and we're passing through them now. It really does quieten the street down quite a lot and makes a nice parallel route to Trafalgar Road, which is running to our right just past those houses. That's much busier and doesn't currently have cycle lanes on it, although when Greenwich Town Centre connection is completed, as I was talking about earlier, there should be a good cycle lane on there as well, and you won't have to come this way. That is still a couple of years off, but what is not a couple of years off is this section of Cycleway 4. Yes, we are back on C4, and yes, they built several different bits in an order where they don't actually connect to each other. That might seem strange, but I think it's because the Greenwich Town Centre bit is probably the most expensive section. That requires the most heavy engineering. You can probably tell that this bit has also been built with temporary materials, and to an extent it is a bodge job, although it does work quite nicely and feels perfectly safe to cycle along. It's a shame that the bits don't already connect up, as this one does have significantly fewer people cycling than the other sections, but I'm sure that will change when it's more obviously being connected to the rest of the route, which can take people into central London from here. Now that cycle lane actually goes all the way to New Charlton and Charlton Station, but we've turned off it a bit early to go down Armitage Road. This is my little route to connect us to the Thames Path, which we'll hopefully be joining in a few minutes. For now, you'll want to weave your way through these streets and not miss this turning here. You are allowed to cycle on this path, and that bollard we went past actually used to have a blue shared space sign on, but it seems to have fallen off. You can see the little cycle symbols on the floor, and also on the floor here there are blue shared space signs showing that you are allowed to cycle on that section of pavement and this path as well. This section of the route is a little bit fiddly and probably does have the worst wayfinding out of all of it in the whole video, so if you do need to work out how to follow it or you think you might forget it, you can always download the free map of the route, which I link to in the description below the video. It's hosted on a website called Komoot, so you could use that app, but you can also download the GPX file and load it into whatever app or device you choose to use. It is a standard format. For now though, we're using this rather handy bridge to cross the Blackwall Tunnel Southern Approach Road. It's not amazing and it does have incredibly long ramps to go up it, but that's sort of to make them not too steep whilst getting over such a big road. And as far as cycle bridges go in London, this one is pretty good, I think. It's nice and wide, and yeah, you are allowed to cycle on it, as you see by the cycle symbols leading up to it. There are some kind of weird cycle lanes here, mostly good except for the lampposts in the path, which I always find strange. When you build a cycle lane, do you not think that you need to remove them? I don't know. I've never built one. After you use this pretty decent cycle crossing to get onto Southern Way, you do get onto another cycle path, although do be aware that the construction site here has actually closed the pavement, so you will find people walking along the cycle path. Since they've got no other option, it is important that you do be courteous when they do that and just give them plenty of space. Now there's a slightly annoying part of this route, not because it's difficult to cycle, but because it has some contradictory signage on it, which I don't think is fair. Note the blue shared space sign on the pole and also on the floor again, but then also the no cycling sign with a red cross through it on those lampposts. This path through Southern Park is a legitimate official cycle route, but for some reason the developers and the private organisation appointed to manage the park have put up these no cycling signs which contradict the existing signs saying you can cycle, which were installed by the council. The signs that they've put up are not legal traffic signs, and they also don't really make any sense, especially next to the signs saying that you can cycle down here, so I think it's completely fair to ignore them. If you disagree, you can dismount and walk your bike, or alternatively, if you want to avoid the park entirely, you could go right at the park entrance using the shared pavement down West Park side, then turn left down Pear Tree Way, and you'd meet us on the route around here. Here is of course the Thames Path, which will become obvious as we go around this corner with a nice view across the river. I've always found this section of the Thames Path to be absolutely fascinating, as there's so few places in London where you can cycle around so much heavy industry. The aggregate conveyor belt systems up ahead are particularly impressive and just look really cool. A lot of the industry around here is construction materials to fuel London's building boom, and the aggregate belts up ahead are basically big conveyor belts which transport aggregate materials, so things like gravel, sand, etc., to and from barges which pull up on the wharf on our left to these asphalt and concrete plants which are on the right. It's a cool and really efficient way of moving materials around and means that so much stuff doesn't have to be loaded onto lorries. That means less traffic, which is great, especially if you're riding around town on a bike. One of the downsides is that those conveyor belts do leak a bit, so if you see a lot of sand on the floor in some places, that's why. By the way, if you're doing this route as a leisure ride, just take note of the Anchor and Hope pub, which we're passing through now. It's a nice place to sit by the river and have a pint, although there are some pretty nice pubs at the end as well, if you can hold on. The quality of the path along here is pretty variable, but it basically works. It can feel a little bit tight in places, and the surface isn't always the best, but there is street lighting along pretty much the whole thing, and an effort is sometimes made to separate pedestrians and people cycling, although it is a little bit inconsistent. By far the best thing about this path though is the great view of the Thames barrier, which is just to our left there. That is London's flood defence, and it's meant to stop tidal surges coming in from the estuary. It's an amazing piece of engineering and also an amazing piece of architecture. One thing I'm also weirdly fascinated by is the massive Environment Agency logo on the control building ahead of us. Who built it? Who decided it was necessary? And is it the biggest Environment Agency logo in the country or even the world? There are some things that I don't know the answer to. Now, for those of you planning to do this route after 9 PM, you'll want to pay attention here. For some reason, the gate at the far end of this street, which we're about to pass to, shuts at 9 PM and is locked. So there's a diversion at night time. If you see this purple and blue sign on the lamppost there, it's signpost to the diversion, just follow it. This here is the gate that is locked, and it seems like a silly thing to do, and they should probably just leave it open. I assume it has something to do with the high security status of the Thames barrier, but it still seems silly to me. Fortunately, since I last came down this street, the local council seems to have patched up some of the worst potholes on Harrington Way, which used to be terrible and has now been fixed up a little bit. There's also another gate here, which you'll have to go through. You may notice that we're following the Q14 or Quiet Way 14 signage, which, although it really just directs you back to the Thames Path, is useful on those bits where the path is a little bit more ambiguous and it kind of snakes through the roads away from the riverfront. It helps get you back onto the riverfront if you ever miss it. Of course, you could just use the map of the route, which I provide in the description. One of those slightly annoying narrow bits that I was talking about is here. You can see that lots of people are having to swerve off the path because there just isn't enough space. The surface is also pretty poor, and one thing to watch out for from a safety perspective are these paths leading to the housing estate to the right, which emerge from the hedge without warning. Obviously, just go a bit slow down here as somebody might run out from there at any minute. With blind corners like that, I always like to imagine that a child is going to leg it out of there to encourage me to ride with the appropriate level of care. By the way, if you've made it this far in the video, then you're probably enjoying it, whether you admit it to yourself or not. So do make sure that you hit the subscribe button on the channel for more videos just like it. I do try and post new ones every week. Also hammer the like button on YouTube. It does help other people find the video, as it boosts the video's ranking in YouTube's algorithm and recommends it to more people. So yeah, it is helpful. One thing I also want to mention, which I don't talk about enough on this channel, and I should really mention in every video, is that there is a map of all the different London cycle routes videos, also linked in the description below the video, which you can use to help you find different routes around different parts of London. There's basically lines on the map, and the lines linked to the appropriate videos. It's a brilliant way of doing it. Thanks to John and Isaac who put that together for me. You guys are great. This is also a great opportunity for me to say thanks so much to all of those of you who signed up on the Patreon, whether you're long-term Patreon subscribers or you've joined more recently. You're all brilliant. You guys do help keep the channel going. Whenever I'm thinking, maybe I won't do a video this week, there's a voice at the back of my mind going, what will the Patreon subscribers say? So it's great to keep me motivated, but also it's also just nice to get paid and reimbursed for my time and costs. If you're not already on there and you are feeling generous, then there's a link in the description below the video. We're just passing through the Woolwich ferry terminal here, and one cool thing you might not know about it, which is cycling related, is there's actually a cycle path which leads all the way out on the jetty so that you can cycle up to the ferry. It's actually marked with cycle symbols, and it's even on cycle maps, which is kind of interesting, a bit of trivia. Here's the ferry now. It looks pretty impressive. I've actually never been on it, but I'd like to try it one day. Maybe I will do that. I don't really know why there are chicanes here, because it leads directly onto a proper cycle path. Presumably when those development hoardings are lifted, that cycle path will continue towards that ramp. But either way, I can't really complain because the cycle track that they have built is pretty fantastic. It's nice and wide. It has a great surface, and it's also even a nice colour, although it's weird that they can't decide whether it's green or red. I'm not sure why they've done it like that. I think it looks better in red personally. What do you prefer? Let me know in the comments below the video. We're actually going to leave the Thames Path now for the very final section of our video, and we're going to turn down number 1 Street. Now this is a really unusual name for a street, and I, for the life of me, have not been able to find in my research why it's called number 1 Street. I suspect it has something to do with the fact that we're going through the old Woolwich Arsenal here, but I can't be sure. From a practical point of view, there are some cobbles here, and you can bypass them with the smooth path on the left here, although everybody else had the same idea too, so I just went on the cobbles to go around them. Just north of Woolwich Road here, we have almost a town square / village green thing going on, with 2 pubs which are both really pleasant to sit out in. These are the pubs that I promised you at the end of the bike ride. Unfortunately, there's not a cycle crossing to get over Woolwich Road, so I've dismounted here. I'm just going to walk to go into Beresford Square. When Cycleway 4 is finished, there should be protected cycle tracks all the way down that road which we just crossed, but for now there aren't any, and I've shown you the way to bypass them. If you're wondering what these construction hoardings are here, this is actually a project to rebuild Beresford Square and improve it as a public space, which was funded with some government levelling up money, as well as the council and various other sources of funding. We're going to end the video just outside Woolwich Arsenal DLR station, and I think you'll agree that we've had a pretty long ride there. I think this might be the longest video I've ever done on the channel. It's nearly half an hour long, so if you're still with me, well done. You are very committed, or you just really enjoyed the video and should totally hit the subscribe and like buttons. Let me know in the comments what you think of that. As you can see from the map, it's incredibly direct, despite the little detour that we had to do around Cutty Sark. If you look at the eastern end of the route though, you will see that being able to stick to the main road when Cycleway 4 is finished should make it even more direct and mean that we don't have to do that little dog leg up to the river. And hopefully that should save a good 5 or 10 minutes off the route, which will be nice. although it might be a bit slower if you have to stop at traffic lights on the main road, which you don't have to do on the Thames Path, which is, I suppose, an advantage. I've been wanting to do Waterloo to Woolwich for absolutely ages. I was originally going to do it using the Quiet Way 1 or Cycleway 10 route, which is an alternative to Cycleway 4, but I had to wait for Thames Water to stop digging up Old Woolwich Road, which was that quiet street east of the college. They took absolutely ages to do that, and by the time they'd finished, I thought I might as well wait for Cycleway 4 to open, but then that also took ages. But it's done now, so do send me your comments, criticism, suggestions and requests in the comments below on YouTube. Thanks again to Patreon subscribers, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye!